Hi, I'm Hannah.
Hi, I'm Abby.
And this is Spilling Ink.
The Ink Spill podcast.
We're on episode 4.
Yeah, the final one of the winter season.
Final one. And we finally, we've made it. We've made it to our mental health episode as well.
Yes.
So we've got loads to cover today, haven't we?
We have. It's going to be a busy one. But before we go into the theme of this episode, shall we just backtrack and talk about our creative projects?
Yeah, absolutely.
I might get lost. So last week we spoke to the lovely Rosa, which was just fantastic. And we set ourselves 3 creative prompts, tasks.
Yeah.
Kind of like baby homework for us. So should we talk about Rosa's task first that she gave us?
Absolutely.
So to remind people, that was the creative task where you write, I remember, and it's inspired by your own memories. Do you want to go first or shall I?
You go first.
Okay, I'll go first. Yeah, it was a really interesting one for me, which I think worked really well looking ahead to this episode because I knew what we were going to be discussing. We have a fabulous guest who we'll talk more about later. Yeah, for me, the memories that came up were quite emotional. So I can talk about this because by the time this podcast comes out, it'll happen. I'm actually going to have a minor surgical procedure quite soon. And I have a lot of trauma surrounding that. I have a wonderful therapist. I'm dealing with it in my own ways, and we will talk about it later, I'm sure. But because that was coming up, I found myself, I remember ing a lot of not very pleasant things, but it does tie quite nicely into one of the themes of the collection I want to talk about, which is this like quite difficult medical trauma. But yeah, it was a really interesting one, and I actually found myself doing it quite a few times. But I'm really glad that we gave ourselves a caveat of like, make sure you surface, because one time my mum interrupted and I had to be like, no, I'll talk to you later. Like I can't and she was lovely. Like my mum's fabulous, but I was just like, I can't break this. I need to kind of like literally, when divers, like deep sea divers have to surface, or they get the bends where they get like air in their bloodstream.
No.
It's probably got, I think it's called like decompression sickness, but they call it the bends in diving, as far as I know. As a diving expert, I believe it's that. Basically, they have to come up slowly, or they can. Yeah, I believe it's get air in the bloodstream.
Oh wow. And
it can make them really ill and can kill them, and that's why when people they leave such a big gap at the end of a dive to come back up slowly. Anyway, it was very similar to that for me. I had to like surface.
Yeah.
Super interesting.
But I think that does make sense, because obviously the entire point of this creative exercise is you are delving deeper into those memories. As I remember, the more times you do that, the deeper you go in, and you really do need to give yourself that moment of decompression, as we kind of talked about last week, before, like you say, you surface.
Yeah.
Because if not, you can carry quite a bit of those, maybe you've delved into some memories that aren't too pleasant, you can bring them to the surface, and quite often, it
affects us in the day.
It can affect you in the day, and I think that's it. It's important to acknowledge those traumas and maybe something that has affected you, as I'm sure we're going to discuss today with Alice.
Yes.
However, I think writing shouldn't solely be about that. It should be about processing those feelings, not allowing them to actually impact us in day-to-day life. So I think you
definitely
did the best thing there.
Thank you.
I didn't get quite so deep with it, because I'm trying to use it in relation to my novel. So I'm trying to think about the town that I grew up in, some of the stories that I've been told. So I was actually really trying to remember memories of my town.
Yeah.
I remember cycling down this lane. I remember falling in the pond.
Yeah.
I remember my grandma knocking out a swan with a handbag because it was trying to attack me.
Fabulous.
Yeah, so I've just been trying to remember just little things about my upbringing that I want to tie into this, into my novel, to make it feel more human. So yeah, I didn't get quite so deep with it, but then again, I think that is very telling of me as a person again.
I think it just is very representative of us as people, and I love that.
Yeah. So really good, really enjoyed doing Rosa's activity. I think that's something we might bring to Inkspill as well.
I think all of the workshop activities we've done so far are super useful for Inkspill, and definitely something we should squirrel away in our secret little folder of things.
Yeah, definitely.
So the Pantser activity was morning pages, but taking them out into the real world and doing them. And I went to... how can I forget? I went to Arcade. So if anyone is local to Huddersfield, Arcade Food and Coffee, or Coffee and Food, is based in Barham Arcade by the train station in Huddersfield. Great food, great vibes, lovely staff.
Lovely architecture and interiors.
Yeah, it's set in a Victorian arcade, like one of the best building in Huddersfield.
Oh, definitely.
Architecturally. I think they're finally taking the scaffolding down as well, which is nice.
Oh, brilliant.
But yeah, I was meeting a friend and I just sat there for like, I think, unusually I was early. And they were on time. I can't say they were late, but I was early. So I think I sat there for like 10-15 minutes and I think I wrote 4 or 5 pages in the end. Yes, the first 2 pages were complete guff. But I use it as free writing. I didn't necessarily kind of focus on my project, which was one of those interesting things of like, I just kind of, if I'm not zoned into a project, I just kind of just let myself do whatever I need to do, because at least I'm writing. But it probably will feed back in eventually, because it was to do with I remember I did that the day before for the first time, and I was like, okay, cool, I want to kind of like see where this takes me. And I think I started with like, I'm not sure why, because it's like medical stuff and I don't want to go into it, but like it was like, I remember something, like one sentence stuck with me and I carried that through and it was really interesting.
Yeah.
So yeah, really enjoyable, and I got to eat a good slice of cake while I ate it. So
Ooh, yeah,
very
good.
nice.
So I have actually done this. I've been doing this activity more on a notes page because I found myself on lots of trains recently. I try to forego driving as much as possible because I love sitting on a bus or a train and just watching people. I love people watching.
Yep.
And I always think trains especially are interesting because you've got so many different types of people setting out on different types of day, different types of journey. And it was a Saturday and I was going to Leeds and there were people there for a hen party, people who were trying to work in amongst tutus and blow up dolls, and then there were people who were just having family days out, and I just saw such a mixture of people, and I just love just sitting and trying to give them all stories as to where they're going, maybe who they're going home to, and who they are as people.
Yeah, you're just very nosy.
I'm so nosy, but the thing is, what I love is I'll never know, so I just like to create stories for them from my imagination.
I love that. That's fabulous.
So rather than I was taking the world around me, but I was actually taking in the people around me on this very compact and sweaty train to Leeds. But yeah, my planning activity was about visuality. So kind of taking inspiration from Rosa, scrapbooking, and trying to make the planning process visual. I do that naturally anyway, so I think...
Do you?
Yeah, for me, that wasn't really a goal I needed to set myself because I do quite naturally mood board, whether that's on Pinterest, but I do like a lot of craft things. So
very crafty.
And I do lots of journaling and I do lots of scrapbooking anyway. That's kind of my moment of calm before I go to bed. I have half an hour of doing a bit of scrapbooking.
What time do you go to bed again?
9. 9, well, 9:30 is scrapbooking time. And then she sleeps. But yeah, so I do that quite naturally, but I have enjoyed what Rose was saying about setting up your goals for the next day. So I used that scrapbooking time as a moment of pre-planning the vibe that I was going to try and capture the next day in my writing.
I love that. That's fantastic.
How have you got on with that?
Yeah, it was a really interesting one for me. I only recently started using Pinterest for my novel, which was so helpful. It was something Rose talked about last week about setting, like, using it for like scenes and like creating like vibes. I can't remember. It was a week ago. We're not on the ball. We've slept since then a lot. But I was like, this is such an interesting idea to bring to poetry because it's never something I've done before. I've always kind of like, I'm a very visual poet for my page poetry. I'm a very wordy poet for my performance poetry, which is really interesting. They don't often overlap. But I was like, cool, okay, for this collection, one of the big themes is relationships. One of the big themes currently is relationships. I'm not sure how it's going to evolve. We're going to discuss how we're going to take these projects forward in the gap between the winter season and the spring season. So I'm not a physical person in the same way you're scrapbooking. I did a lot of like Pinteresty kind of collaging online and just even making a pinned board, whatever they call the collections on Pinterest. Yeah. I did that. I'm such an old lady. I did that and I curated lots of pictures of like relationships. And some of my favourite ones were like involved a mirror and this person like holding a mirror to them and like it looked like they were embracing another body, but it was their own body reflecting stuff. Like it was really cool. I've learned a lot about myself from this relationship, which I didn't think you could. I think I felt quite whole previously, but I actually feel much more whole now.
You didn't realise what was missing before.
That's it, and that's probably why that picture resonated with me so much, of just like that kind of like physical spectral body. It was very, very interesting, and I really, really enjoyed it. So yeah, really interesting really interesting. Like, all these workshops are just building up for us. I'm really enjoying it.
I am as well. I think, yeah, definitely getting that inspiration from other writers, it's invaluable, isn't it?
Yeah.
But yeah, no, that's brilliant. Well, we'll kind of regroup again at the end of today's episode, I'm sure, because we are going to have a little break after this first season to finish off our initial projects before we get to the editing phase.
Yeah.
But today's episode is all about mental health, isn't it?
Yes.
We said when we set out on this podcast, it was really important to us that one episode per season was dedicated to mental health.
Yeah, and how writing supports people looking after their mental health. Because that's basically a core component of Inkspill, is writing for writing's sake and just enjoying it, and not, you know, if you want to share something at the end, you can, but you don't have to. And that's, it's just super important, and people miss it quite a lot. And we're really glad to give people space for that.
Yeah, and I think so many people use writing and poetry as a way of expressing themselves and some maybe feelings that they've got, some emotions they've got, maybe some experiences they've been through. So we're going to be speaking to somebody today called Alice from Dwell Time, which is a publication that started out in Huddersfield, and it is solely about mental health. They only publish work that is along the theme of mental health.
Yes.
So I think we're going to learn a lot from Alice today, and kind of thinking about how that got started, and maybe some tips that Alice has for somebody who maybe
resources, things like that.
Yeah, places to turn to for someone who's wanting to potentially use writing and creativity as a way to channel those emotions.
Yeah.
So I'm really excited to speak to her and see what she has to say.
Yeah, it's gonna be a wonderful time. Should we go chat to her?
Let's go chat.
Fab.
First of all, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it. So you're from Dwell Time, and your name is Alice. So could you just introduce yourself, introduce Dwell Time, and just let us know a little bit about you.
Thanks so much for having me on this podcast. So I'm Alice Bradshaw. I'm an artist, curator, writer based in Elland, West Yorkshire, and I'm one of the co-founders of Dwell Time, which is a publication reflecting on mental wellbeing. And we do more than just a publication. We do podcasts, events, workshops. Dwell Time was founded in 2018, and it's a bit of a legacy project. One of our close friends died by suicide in 2015, so this is a bit of a legacy project for him. He was really passionate about raising awareness about mental health and wellbeing. And initially, we were partnered with the rail industry, through a kind of like serendipitous meeting of the Penistone Line Partnership. And since COVID, that's kind of dissipated, and we've aligned more with the arts sector. So we've partnered with Yorkshire Visual Arts Network. And it's not kind of necessarily like a strategic, this is how we're going to operate and execute that delivery plan kind of thing. It's more a kind of, serendipitous sort of who we bump into, who we like to work with, who we gel with, what opportunities come our way. So at the moment we are working with the University of Huddersfield on issue 3, which the open call was launched in March 2020. Just as we were supposed to be launching issue 2, we had a lovely festival type of launch program set up, everybody lined up. And then a week before national lockdown, it was all looking a bit grim, and we cancelled it, unfortunately. But immediately after we cancelled the issue 2 launch, we thought this pandemic is going to be catastrophic for mental wellbeing. You know, the services are already in poor shape, mental health services, and not fit for purpose on the whole, maybe, arguably. So we thought it would be really interesting to put an open call out for responses to the pandemic specifically. And we closed that open call the beginning of this year, 5th of January. And we have hundreds and hundreds of submissions that range from paintings of empty supermarket shelves.
Wow,
from, you know, all the way back then.
Yeah.
I think people like to block out the memories sometimes, and you know, it's a bit like we don't talk about the war, we don't talk about the pandemic and how you know, the experiences we all had. So the university have some MA students that are going to respond creatively to this archive of work, which is very exciting. So we've given like kind of free rein to them to do what they want with. They obviously have issue 1 and issue 2 as a kind of like examples of what we've done previously, but we're not really kind of putting in many restrictions on what the outcome's going to be. So yeah, that's really exciting. And we did have a gallery space in Huddersfield Town Centre that was an empty shop space brokered by East Street Arts. So it was always the deal that if the landlord sold or found a commercial tenant, then we would be given notice, and that's exactly what happened.
Yeah.
The landlord sold, sadly, so we decanted. It was quite a big space. We had lots of furniture, and we got rid of all that, gave it away to different, random people, neighbours in the shopping in arcade that we were in, and also Ame in Huddersfield took a lot of our a big screen of ours and some furniture. And then the rest of the stuff, mainly lots of issue 2 publications that we still have left, is in my studio.
Right.
So we're working kind of out of my studio peripatetically, delivering workshops, and working with the university. So that's where we're at the moment.
No,
Yeah.
that's fantastic. It sounds so exciting.
It does, yeah, and I think so many people were affected by the pandemic, and I think that's something that, Inkspill was very much born from that, because for so long we were just so isolated, weren't we? And I think a huge part of the creative process is reaching out and speaking with others and learning and being inspired by others. And I think I had a very similar feeling during the pandemic. I thought this is really going to impact people in a variety of ways that I don't even think we realised at the time. So I think it's really important what you guys are doing, kind of. I think, first of all, the project you're doing with the university sounds really interesting, because it is an era of time that I think all of us we all went through something really quite traumatic.
Hugely
there.
so, yeah.
And it's very much all just been swept under the carpet, and we've all just kind of cracked on with life now. But actually, I think you're doing something really important in reflecting and unpicking what happened there. And we both went to the University of Huddersfield, and I would have loved an opportunity like that. So I think that it's brilliant that you're doing that. That sounds fantastic.
It's also like, because the submission window was so long, you have such a interesting cross section of people's response to the pandemic, because like it was very like wartimey, like, oh, it'll be over by Christmas when it happened in March, and like people were really just like, we can do this, and as time slipped on and like the very serious reality came to light, people's mental health took a hit, and people would have responded very differently creatively. And it's I'm really excited to see issue 3, because I imagine that's going to be really, really interesting. So
I think as well, a lot of people found during that pandemic kind of the lighter side of it. They were given that time to maybe explore something that they haven't necessarily had the chance to do before. So I know quite a few writers emerged from that pandemic. So kind of thinking about Dwell Time, who can get involved with Dwell Time? And I know that you are kind of, so is it still Huddersfield based? Are you still kind of, so you're based in Elland now, you said?
Yeah, so just physically where my studio is, that's our kind of technical base, but we work internationally in terms of open call, so it's an international open call. And like I mentioned before, we will work with anybody that kind of we gel with, so that that could be like Handforth railway station we work with as well. We still have a collaboration with them, so it's kind of like how we sort of map out our like partnerships and collaborations is just kind of where we travel to. So so we've got work still on the Penistone line. We've got boards at the train stations of people's artwork. So it's kind of like where we end up, if that makes sense. And if people want us to post issues to various places, we can do. So part of our issue 2 launch, when we cancelled the in-person one due to the pandemic and lockdown, was we did a bit of an online thing, and we said it's free, the publication. So if people wanted to pay the postage, we could post them out. So obviously people couldn't, it was not possible to get the magazine's publications anywhere that as a distribution. We couldn't do a kind of normal distribution. So that's an option that people can like pay the postage and have them delivered. So that kind of, we posted fairly kind of broadly in the UK, but some went international as well. So yeah, that is still an option as well if people want to have a copy.
No, that's fab. We'll make sure when this interview goes live that we'll share your stuff on social media and links and stuff, so if people do want to grab a copy, they know where to find you, because that'd be amazing.
Yeah, and I think that's so. I'm quite really thankful to Dwell Time, because I remember I moved to Huddersfield in 2020, and I think that's how I came to know Dwell Time. I saw your you had a display in the train station. And I was reading all the boards and I was like, how have I not heard of this before? And my husband Ben actually started working at a cafe called The Turntable, and your shop unit, I think, was there, wasn't it? It was opposite that cafe.
Yeah, so Turntable was our main coffee shop to go to.
Yeah, it's a good place to be.
And so we quite often I'd go in, and I think it was Lenny, first of all, who I started speaking to, who talked to me about Dwell Time. And I just thought you guys were just doing such important work, and I think coming out of the pandemic, I thought, what a crucial thing to have so close to home as well. I thought the work that you guys did well, and are continuing to do, is brilliant.
Which is really funny, because I've been Huddersfield for several years now and I hadn't actually heard of you, and I've been doing creative stuff, and it's so interesting how we often run in these circles where we just don't quite get out into them, and it's so exciting. And that's why we're glad to be doing stuff like this, because it means that we're both introduced to new people and new projects. It's so exciting.
It is. But I remember at that point I'd started writing poetry, but I didn't have any confidence in myself, and I think I sent it to you guys, and I just mainly for just to get your opinion on it. And I remember you actually featured one of my poems on your feed, and I was like, oh my gosh, someone's actually put me out there. And you kind of gave me my very first glint of hope of, actually, maybe I could do this, maybe I could be a poet. So I'll always be thankful to you guys.
Oh wow, that's amazing.
Yeah,
that's
and I think you've got, I'm sure you'll have quite a few stories like that with people who you've given opportunities to over the years. So yeah, just a thank you from me, I guess. But I think that's what I love about what Dwell Time does. You guys don't just feature poets, you feature an array of kind of mediums, don't you? You incorporate art into your work as well, and I think that's what makes the publications that you produce so interesting, because it's a united theme, but different approaches to that theme, and I think that visuality as well works really well. So kind of thinking about the people who come and produce work and are featured in Dwell Time, have you kind of got any anecdotes or any stories of how being creative has an impact on people's mental health? Have you got anything to kind of share in that area?
Yeah, so anecdotally, we have people saying that they've not processed certain feelings, emotions, experiences, trauma until they have done the workshops. And we have an interview with one of our workshop participants, Mary, who we worked with at a Hoot workshop. I think it was a cut-up poetry workshop, which we really love this technique, because it's not a blank piece of paper with a pen and you've got to think of words. It's like literally cutting pre-existing words out of the magazine, so there's less of a challenge to initially get going, I guess.
Yeah, definitely.
And I think this interview with Mary really encapsulates how powerful creative practice can be. She lost her son to suicide many years ago, and she hadn't processed this bereavement, this trauma. And she'd really struggled with approaching different bereavement organisations and not really getting the support she needed. But this creative process just happened to tap into something that she could write this poem, construct this poem that really got into like the deeper layers of trauma that she'd not accessed. So that particular story is just, I found it really moving interviewing her. I thought it was just so lovely and powerful that, just providing this simple process, this simple kind of creative workshop could have such a profound effect on somebody's life. And actually, like doing the work with Dwell Time has inspired me to do more training in mental health, and now I work in a hospital and acute mental health wards doing sort of similar type of activity, and it's really
important work.
Yeah, it's really valuable for me personally. I get a lot out of it. So yeah, like Dwell Time massively shifted my whole career, really.
Yeah,
that's so exciting.
Yeah, and I think quite often in life, and we've spoken to quite a few poets through Inkspill, when something happens to us, I think naturally it's hard to put that into words, isn't it? So by kind of forcing yourself to write about it and having it there physically in front of you, it's a way of dealing with those really hard emotions, I think.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so I think a lot of people listening to this will completely know what kind of where you're coming from there. Sometimes you just find a way of tapping into that trauma that you've maybe not considered before. And I think that activity is particularly powerful, isn't it? Because if you can't find the word yourself, kind of that cut and stick feeling, it'll trigger something without you even realizing, I guess, because somebody else has provided you with the words that you can't quite formulate yourself at that time, maybe.
Yeah, and I think there's something quite therapeutic about cutting and sticking as well. So it's obviously a very different method than writing with a pen, writing with a laptop, or something like that. And cutting and sticking just is a kind of nice meditative practice, I think. So that adds to the whole writing sort of experience, if you want to call it writing. I suppose it is writing, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. And I think there's an element of it. It stops you from being on your phone. It stops you from being distracted. You can't, and you definitely shouldn't cut anything without focusing on it. And there's like a real like meditation element to it where you're like focused on just the action and like the hand-eye coordination and like there's no, and you can like, people will chat obviously while you do crafting activities, but you have that connection rather than any other sort of digital connection. I think it's really beautiful, and like something we really enjoyed Inkspill is doing a lot of like sort of physical based writing.
We do, yeah. We try to encourage kind of writing through collage and craft as much as possible, because I think having that physicality does definitely help with the writing process. But I think it helps you mentally process emotions as well, which is equally as important. Kind of just the questions that we sent through to you. In your opinion, how does writing support mental health?
I think like writing creatively, so it might be fiction or kind of like poetry or something, is a way of maybe processing different things, like we talked about processing emotions and trauma, that talking about it just as it is in a sort of like journaling or a therapeutic context is it shifts it, and I think it gives a bit of power and agency to the author, to the person, to like manage and control what their experience.
Yeah.
So, for example, if someone's had a traumatic experience that's like out of their control, they can regain some control by like talking about it in a certain way, and that's a really powerful thing to kind of like recover from a trauma. And I think it's like journaling about stuff and talking about it in a kind of like, this is what happened, is also a value in itself of processing. So, if something's in our head, we think about it differently to when we're like talking about it or writing about it. It's like that kind of analogy of like getting it all out, isn't it?
Definitely.
Whilst it's in your head, it can like just kind of keep going around. Maybe people catastrophize about certain situations, and if you get it out of your head, it's almost like you can be done with that thought, if that makes sense. And so that's really useful as well, like if people are struggling with something, and it's a way of kind of like getting it out onto a page or onto a screen. I think that those are really kind of valuable processes.
Yeah, definitely.
Kind of giving you this closure, really, I guess, by like you say, if you repress, it's just going to keep darting around in your mind, isn't it? So if you can get it out into some sense, or something, you've had to process those feelings to get them out onto that page, haven't you? Or no matter how that looks, whether that's through writing or through art, you've had to go through some kind of process to communicate that on the page or transfer that onto the page. I totally understand what you're saying there.
Also, when you process into words, you're using your prefrontal cortex, whereas trauma is often like, it's kept in the reptilian brain, like the really sort of, the more sort of like basic type of where your emotions are. So when you're bringing it into words, it's like changing it into a different kind of like thought pattern, if that makes sense.
No, it definitely is. And also there's a response where you write differently when your brain's relaxed, and often like you have to get to a certain point of writing that you can relax your brain to kind of process that kind of stuff. And often like that kind of meditative action, cutting and sticking, creating art, writing, however you need to do it, like that unlocks that level that you can therefore like access it, rather than having to like sort of sit on the surface and kind of just process the sort of immediate stuff. You can actually go back in time and get to things that's it's really important.
Yeah, and I think as well, listening to what we've been talking about so far, I always find that, well, writing has a huge psychological influence as well, doesn't it? Because we almost have to get into, if we're kind of talking about this from a poetry lens, but as well, if somebody's a writer and wanting to produce a novel or a piece of prose, that's quite tricky, because you've got to get into the mindset of your character. And if you've got quite a troubled character, I think that can sometimes be quite damaging. So as writers, we need to protect ourselves as well, if we're kind of going into the mindset of a character who is quite troubled. But I think I'm so interested in how psychology influences our creativity as well, and how we use writing as a psychological output.
Yeah, definitely.
And yeah, I think that's something I'd love to do some more research into that. Just because that's something that I don't know enough about, and I bet there's a whole pool of research out there on that. Why is it so important that people have support with their writing, do you think? Why are publications such as Dwell Time, if it's not obvious, so important, do you think?
I think most people have lack of confidence. I think when you're expressing yourself, and especially if you're doing something for the first time, it can be quite daunting. And we've had a lot of people respond to the acceptance email we send out. It's usually via Creator Space, so there's bits and work, and we have a policy of accepting everything to be published online, but then for the publication we make a curated selection. So we really wanted to make sure we published everything online and be as inclusive as possible, because we really recognise, like, if people are struggling with their mental health, the last thing they need is a rejection email. We've all had them; they're not nice.
No.
And just giving somebody that kind of platform and a bit of a sort of like, we believe in you, we like your stuff. If we don't necessarily have a direct kind of, we read something or we see something and we don't go, oh wow, that's amazing. Somebody else might, it's like our subjective opinion isn't the be all and end all. It might be that somebody sees something that we think, oh, it's interesting, but it's not amazing. Somebody else looks at it, reads it, and thinks they really, it might really resonate with them. So yeah. I think there is a really strong value in having a kind of inclusive, publish everything type of policy. And yeah, like, people might not have drawn, painted, written anything before, and it might have been their first time. So it's a bit of a kind of like, hopefully a boost for them to go, oh, it's been published. Somebody validates me, so I'll do some more. Hopefully gives them the confidence to do more.
Yeah.
So I think that, it's really important that we all have a creative outlet. I think it's really, really important.
It is. And I think definitely as the government closes funding and reduces seats in universities on these creative courses, it's so good that there's elements like projects like this out there that people can engage with and actually have the time to create for, and that momentum and that goal. I think we're so the minute you leave school and you lose that kind of direction of attainment, which is definitely freeing, you also can kind of stagnate on creativity, because there's no kind of, especially if you're not in a family that's creative, you can lose that. And it's so nice that there's like open submission calls like this that people can go and have that time and that direction to create for. So yeah, it's fantastic.
Yeah, and I think I really liked what you said there as well, because we experience rejection, and inevitably so. It's a part of being a writer, isn't it? But I think I never actually considered that, given the nature of your publication. Actually, how do you reject a piece when people are being so vulnerable in their writing? I bet that's quite challenging. But as you say, so you have a feed, an online feed where absolutely everybody gets featured. It's just then the actual physical kind of publications that you curate them.
Yeah, because we want the publication to be a cohesive thing in itself. And we did, I don't know how many we accepted and rejected for the publication. But yeah, we felt like we wanted the publication to have a kind of like feel to it, and be cohesive. We do have an exception to the publish everything online policy, which is like if something's going to potentially cause harm by being very explicit.
Yeah.
So out of thousands of submissions, we've only had to reject 2 on that basis.
Okay.
Because one of them talked explicitly about self-harm, and the other one talked explicitly about eating disorders. So, when we we didn't outright reject them. We explained like we can't publish them for this reason. If you want to edit them so that they are less explicit, then we're happy to publish them. It's not that we don't think that they're of value. It's just we cannot put that risk out there, because we know. We actually consulted on the eating disorder one with Beats, the charity.
They do fantastic work, Beat. They're wonderful.
And we said we think this is potentially problematic. What's your opinion on this? And they said no, they wouldn't publish it for those reasons of it being explicit. It can trigger somebody. So yeah, out of thousands and thousands that we've published, we've only had to turn 2 away, and they were very understanding. I think they were both poems. And the authors were very understanding, and they said that's fine, kind of thing. And I think it is tricky because they're writing from a first-hand experience of this is what they've experienced, and I think there is value in certainly writing it and potentially sharing it. But then if it is going to trigger somebody, then it's potentially causing more harm than good. So
yeah, definitely. Yeah, it's a fine line. Like a lot of poetry events I go to now, we talk about trigger warnings and content warnings and stuff, and it's something that we're building in, because I think particularly poetry, it's an incredibly vulnerable, incredibly emotive experience. And it is an experience because you have to engage fully with the words being said to get the meaning and the rhythm, and it kind of like sweeps you along. I think it's really important that we have those moments of using content and trigger warnings and how to make people comfortable. And it's something we've learnt as event hosts on how to ensure that we give people a safe space, because we have a wide variety of people who join us in our community, which is wonderful. But how do we protect others and while encouraging that creativity? And it's a fine line to find. So it's very interesting to hear your perspective on that.
Yeah, and I think there's a difference between if you're running a live event and you're in a capacity where you could potentially support somebody who's been triggered. That's so much more different than if you're putting a publication out there. You don't know when or what context someone's going to be reading it in, if they're going to be alone, if they're going to be vulnerable. And I think that particularly because both publications were published with like corporate funders, they have a responsibility as well. They were very like what we wanted to publish was much more like provocative than, than what they were willing to put their corporate sort of logos and backing behind and stuff. So that was an interesting process as well, because although we rejected those 2 potentially triggering the suicide and the self-harm pieces, but then anything can be a trigger. If you're dealing with trauma, literally anything could be a trigger. So it's not. And we had this interesting conversation with our corporate partners about triggers and that kind of thing, because like explicit self-harm and explicit eating disorders is obviously very potentially dangerous. But then if you're looking at an image and someone says, oh, that could be triggering, it's like, yes, but for example, the color yellow could be triggering for somebody.
Yeah,
I know somebody who is triggered by the color yellow. So you can't remove what subjectively you think is going to be a trigger, because literally anything can be a trigger. But yeah, like we've had like I mentioned, this whole project Dwell Time inspired me to retrain in mental health and has changed my career. It's because we recognize that when we're running these workshops and dealing with mental health, well-being, and that's our sort of subject matter, potentially people can be triggered and need support. So that's why I ended up like training. I'm currently studying level 3 counselling, because I recognise that if you're dealing with emotive subject matters, then potentially people might need support. You know, it might raise something that they didn't even know that was a trauma for them. And then what do you do with that? You know, there's a responsibility there, isn't there? I think
hugely so, definitely.
There absolutely is. Yeah. What would be your advice then to somebody who potentially, so they're wanting to get into writing, and they're wanting to use their writing process as a way to explore these kind of potential traumas or potential mental challenges? What would be your advice to somebody wanting to express themselves through the channel of writing, as somebody who curates publications with this theme in mind?
I think definitely getting support around yourself, like whether that's, you know, friends, family, therapist, somebody that also writes, you know, so that there's kind of a variety of support on hand. I think looking at other writers that deal with similar issues that you want to talk about can be really helpful. It can be a bit of a double-edged sword. I think it's the same with visual arts as well. Like you look at other artists and other writers, and you can be inspired by them, or go like, oh, that's totally not what I want to do. And it kind of helps, you know, narrow down what you're interested in. Yeah. So it can be really useful, but then sometimes I see it a lot in like colleges and stuff. People start emulating somebody.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like, is it your own work? I mean, I know you like them, but, you know, how do you make it your own? And it can happen subconsciously as well. You know, if you've read something or like looked at some artwork, it can come through subconsciously, of course, as well. So
yeah,
it is a bit of a double-edged sword, but I think like overall it's positive of helping refine what people is like authentically themselves, by looking at other artwork, by reading other, you know, writers, poets and stuff. So yeah, that's also, I'd recommend that.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And I imagine also seeking out workshops like the ones that yourselves run and stuff, that they can be surrounded by a community and also people who are there to be present with them and enjoy the experience, and also be witness to what they're creating, and also step in if they need it, which is again a really interesting sort of not relationship, I don't want to say that, but sort of connection to share, which is quite interesting.
I think community is really important. It's like you mentioned before, like when you leave university, college, you've lost that small community, or maybe it's a big community, but you know, that classroom context. Yeah. And I do run another project, Art Lab in Halifax, which is my kind of like solution for finding that issue myself, like being quite isolated. So it's a monthly event where I invite artists, broad definition of artists, to come and present their artwork. So there's usually 2 each event, and then we have like a, you know, Q&A and a chat about it. And like I set that up in 2018 as a sort of way of me finding out about like what local artists, who was doing what in the local area, and as an answer to not having that artist community. I know lots of artists in the region now. I think, you know, not just that, but like networking, that horrible term, but it is important, you know, to go to different events. For me, it is anyway, and to find out who's doing what, and like maybe where we can collaborate. I absolutely love collaborations. Like,
fantastic.
Most of my curatorial projects are collaborations. So finding your community.
Yeah,
I think studios for artists are really useful, but then not everybody can afford a studio space. So if you're stuck in like a small bedroom or an office space making your own work, how do you know what you're doing is, I don't know, of value? Are you making it for yourself? How do you get into exhibitions? I think community is definitely the way forward.
Yeah. That's something, I mean, we've spoken to quite a few people as part of this first season of the podcast, and that's actually been the biggest piece of advice that everyone's come through with.
Definitely.
Collaboration in a creative world, it's key, isn't it? Because like you say, I think quite often we isolate ourselves. If we can't afford studio space, I know I just lock myself away in a box room where I've got a desk and a mouldy wall and I'm just typing away, and I think that's it. Sometimes you forget to look up and actually reach out to other people, and I think finding your community is something that has come through very strongly, and we are blessed actually in Huddersfield and the surrounding areas. There are so many different types of community available to us.
Yeah, definitely.
It's just a matter of actually having the courage to go to them. I think quite often people get an idea in their head that potentially it's not for them, but and I think I have in the past as well. I've gotten a little bit anxious or overwhelmed, but I think you've just got to do it, haven't you? You've got to put yourself out there, and I think until you actually go and see what it's like, you don't realise actually how valuable these spaces can be.
Yeah, and just try things as well. Like, it's not even so much a risk-taking thing of like stepping outside of your comfort zone. So people might, for example, be super comfortable painting watercolors, oil paints, whatever, but they might not have considered that maybe writing prose is something that they might also enjoy.
Yeah.
And I think just giving things a go, even though you might never have done them before, is like, how do you know if you're going to enjoy it or find it of value unless you try it? So I think trying new things is always a good, if whatever age you are. There's lots of artists that I work with that have come to an art career after they've retired, they've done something completely different, and then they retire and they just try something and then find that they absolutely love it and they've developed a whole practice since retiring. It's never too late. I think it's really interesting what we were talking about with community. I did a writer in residency with YVAN before Dwell Time collaborated with YVAN, and it was all about resilience. The project was called Resilience is Futile, and my proposal as the writer in residence to look at this uncritical word resilience. We're all called resilient in the north because there's no money and we get it done anyway. So my methodology was first of all to ask different people in my community who's resilient, who's a resilient artist, and they named a couple of people that I then went to interview. And I didn't say how are you resilient in that kind of like simplistic term. My interview questions were like, well, what do you do? And it all came down to my kind of conclusion. It all came down to community, that they collaborated, and it was like that was the main thing. So that you're finding that in your podcast is really interesting as well.
Yeah. And I think I've just found it myself as a poet and a writer, and kind of reaching out to different people and getting feedback from others. Of course, you've got to take the criticism because that's all part of being a creative person. And I think as writers, we aren't writers without readers, so we need to take into consideration the fact that somebody's going to be reading this and they've got to enjoy it as well. But I think community, I mean, it sounds cheesy, doesn't it, but community is key, I think.
It also kind of builds that support network of recreating a peer group that enjoys the things you enjoy. That's really nice.
It does. And I'm loving as well with this conversation because you're the first person we've spoken to who's kind of approaching this from an artistic lens as well. And there are so many poets, and actually poets who I really do enjoy the most, who incorporate that within their collections too. So I absolutely love Stevie Smith.
I was just about to say Stevie Smith,
because of the fact that she accompanies the vast majority of her poems with illustrations as well. And I actually find, I was just analysing one of Smith's poems with one of my classes, and they just took so much meaning from the image alone that then it added this entire new meaning to the poem then. And I think quite often, we need to take ourselves out of the box of writers and artists, and actually the fact we're all just creating art forms, aren't we? And we need to see that in a more fluid kind of way, I think.
I agree. I think people can get a bit too hung up on labels. Like I'm an artist, and then we get a lot of imposter syndrome in the sector. It's like, oh, I don't want to call myself an artist. I haven't had an exhibition. How can I call myself an artist? It's like, no. Everybody's an artist. Just let's get rid of all that, And there is a kind of like, I don't know where it comes from, whether it's like art schools or galleries, this sort of perpetuating myth of like you have to do certain things to become an artist, and it's a bit of a
tick box exercise.
Elitism. Yeah, there we go. That was the word I was looking for. There's this kind of pervasive elitism in the sector, and it's like, no. I really dislike that. Let's dismantle that.
Definitely.
Like to try and, Yeah, and like to try and like remove as many hierarchies as possible. So, for example, when Dwell Time run workshops, we'll often do the activity that we're workshopping alongside everybody, and we'll sit down and chat. So it's not a kind of like classroom environment where we're walking around going like, oh, well done, yes, very good. No, none of that.
Yeah.
And we also like put our own work alongside other people's, so it's not like we have this kind of curator producer hierarchy with the artists. Like we're all artists, we're all, you know, producing something together, and that's really important for us to have that kind of ethos.
Yeah, that's definitely a point we've hit with Inkspill, where we used to walk around, check in, be much more involved as hosts on the poetry nights, and now we're making the time to like, we never fully are able to engage with the work just because you're still kind of switched onto hosting, aren't we? But we still try and make sure we sit, and we either join people on a table or we sit at the front, wherever there's room, basically, because we're quite busy, and we take that time to just kind of sit and at least be still, rather than feeling like we constantly have to be, you know, checking in with people, engaging, having that, and teacherly, like we don't want to feel teacherly, we want people to feel relaxed, and that's definitely been a huge thing for us to like sit down.
Yeah, and I think it's again just kind of putting that emphasis on the process, and no matter where you are in your writing career, everyone's got to start somewhere with a project or with a piece, haven't they? So what are your favourite books, and anybody wanting to kind of read more about people who use writing as a way to explore their mental health, would you have any recommendations?
So my favourite books are probably like George Orwell, Ian Banks, that kind of fiction, dark dystopian stuff. I love that. My absolute favourite book ever is The Body Keeps the Score by Bessel van der Kolk. Absolutely brilliant. Anybody that is working in trauma or interested in trauma or has trauma, definitely read that. It's so good.
Basically everyone basically should read that.
Yeah, everybody. Who doesn't have trauma? Do you think anybody exists in the world without trauma?
Absolutely not.
Anybody yet.
No. That's a really fab recommendation. I've seen that before, but I've never actually read it for some reason.
It's good.
But I've heard really, really good things about it. And what is it? What is it about? Sorry, I know.
So it's mind, brain, and body in the transformation of trauma. So he's writing about how the body holds on to trauma. So it's not just in your mind, it's in your whole nervous system. So part 1, the rediscovery of trauma. Part 2, this is your brain on trauma. Part 3, the minds of children. Part 4, the imprint of trauma. And then part 5, paths to recovery. So so he's coming from like a, not a medical background, but a kind of like psychology type of perspective of like why we get trauma. And I'm not sure if it's this author that described like why humans keep trauma in their bodies, but there's a really, I think it's a different author in a different book actually, but there's somebody that writes about why we develop as humans, you know, PTSD and stuff. Not everybody develops PTSD from trauma, but he compares to the animal kingdom where, you know, a gazelle outruns a lion, and immediately what they do is they shake. They basically shake off all the adrenaline and cortisol, whereas humans don't, and they keep that in their body that then manifests in all sorts of, you know,
weird ways.
Yeah, I thought that was really, really interesting as well. Yeah, and that relates to some like somatic therapies to treat trauma and stuff. But yeah, great book. Recommend it to everybody.
Yeah,
fantastic. Thank you so much, Alice.
Thank you so much for talking to us. Really appreciate it.
Oh, thanks for inviting me. It's been great.
Yeah, thank you so much. Really appreciate your time. How fantastic was that?
It was brilliant. And I was just thinking of, it was really nice to have somebody on the show who gave me my first kind of opportunity.
Yeah, that was super
writing.
Cool.
It was just nice. It was nice to catch up. And I just think it's really lovely that we've got something so valuable in our local area.
Yeah.
And it's a publication solely dedicated to helping people connect with themselves through writing and connect with their mental health through writing. And I think how fantastic that they've created something like that.
It is exactly that. We'll make sure we'll share it on all our socials and on our Linktree, so if people want to find out more, they're more than welcome to, because as I say, it's an international submission.
It's grown.
window, which is cool.
Yeah, that was really cool to hear because, as I say, when I first found Dwell Time, it was 2020, and it was, I feel as though it was still quite small then, so to hear how much they've grown in such a short space of time is brilliant.
Yeah, and we'll make sure to keep people updated on when issue 3 comes out for them, because that sounds like a really interesting project, especially working with a uni we both went to.
I know, exactly. As I say, I wish that would have happened when we were there. I'd have really enjoyed to work on that project.
Yeah,
I think.
but I do not wish to go back to university, because it's interesting to talk about mental health, and like particularly as pandemic graduates, how, I mean, I guess I just like quick before we kind of round off, I'd like to kind of mention on how writing has supported both of us, because I think we've both gone through quite big things in our lives, both like socially as like elections and politically and pandemics, but also like privately and stuff. And I think writing, both of us, we both utilise writing to support our mental health and to process things, but we also utilise it to share experiences to engage others, which is really cool.
Yeah.
Would you be interested in starting, or do you want me to start? Is there anything you want to add?
I don't. Yeah. No. I mean, I think everyone inevitably, as a writer, you're giving away a part of yourself, aren't you?
Yeah.
Because
it's very sacrificial.
It is, and I mean, like, just this sounds. I'm not. There'll be some people I imagine will take. We'll find this quite problematic, but just as someone births a child, you birth books, you birth poetry. It comes from you. It's a part of you.
It's often a massive source of grief as well, like emotion.
Yeah, it really is, and I think that has its benefits, but it also can be quite damaging to some people. And I think something Alice touched on, which I found really interesting, was how do you deal with that rejection in a healthy way? And I think for some people, if they are using their writing as an outlet for grief or for the mental challenges that they experience, that can be hard to take, somebody taking that work and rejecting it. So I think you've got to be very, very sensitive in this area. What are your experiences then, if you're thinking about as a writer and considering your mental health? How do the two go together for you?
Hugely. I think, I mean, I've talked about definitely this episode, but also previously, I've gone through a lot of surgical intervention due to a very funky hip problem, which I was only diagnosed with at 19, and it really came out the blue. Normally, it's through maternal line, and it's like quite prevalent. And prior to me, no one in my family had been diagnosed with this condition. And I literally went to the doctors with a limp and came out with this like quite severe form of hip dysplasia.
I didn't realise it was so later on in your life.
It was huge.
No idea.
Yeah, I went to the doctor with this limp. They thought I had sprained my ankle, and then they thought I had a tight IT band between my hip and my knee.
Right.
And then I went to a very specialised hip specialist who just would look at me and was like, no, it's this thing and it's this, and it's really common in babies and dogs, particularly Labradors.
Wow, okay,
really
that's a
bizarre.
lot.
Or golden retrievers, which is a poem that's a line I've been ruminating on for a poem for a long time. So this all kind of happened, and basically that affected all of my A-levels and all of my degree, and meant I was at Newcastle for a year and I dropped out because I was so unwell, and it's been a huge thing. And that's when writing kind of really sprung up for me. Because initially at Newcastle I wasn't doing a creative writing degree, and I had done a creative writing A-level. I was like very lucky to have it. Only in the 3 years that it existed, I got to do it, which was fantastic. And when I came to Huddersfield, I was just instantly struck by this course and had like really good tutors and really engaged tutors. And at the time, I think I just had surgery number 2. I was going to have surgery number 3 at the end of my first year. But also, my granddad was dying, and I had this amazing lecturer whose name completely escapes me because I've had so much morphine that my memories formed during uni are a little bit rocky. But she was fantastic, and she really encouraged me to write poetry to process it, because I was really struggling with pain and my attention span was really short because I was on quite strong painkillers. And it just snowballed from there. Like, that was the first, like, I'd done stuff through my A-level, but that was like the ignition switch, the match being struck. I was like, this is it. And the first collection I wrote was on my granddad dying, and it's called Souvenirs, which I love, and I want to come back to this collection really badly. And it was basically about him dying and me identifying with his like Scouser identity, which never like they'd moved to North Wales. My mum was raised there, so there's not really, they had strong Scouse accents, but we didn't really know the area. And then after him passing, the process of preparing him to be cremated and the funeral and that kind of stuff, because it's like you dress them for the coffin. But they can't wear certain stuff because it will damage the incinerator.
Oh wow.
So like, yeah, it's really interesting, and like choosing what items we put in his coffin, and like my nan gave him a handkerchief. I don't want to talk too much because it will upset me, but this collection was just like an absolutely pivotal turning point. And I wrote it, he died in November, and I wrote it between the September and December.
Right.
And I printed out a little copy and I gave it to my mum, her sister, my aunt, and my nan.
Right.
And they all really loved it, and it was a really beautiful kind of like ending to this project. So for me, that moment solidified that I'm a very feeling person. We talk about that quite a lot, that I am always in my feels and I do cry quite easily. And poetry for me, I'm a verbal processor, so it was another way of verbally processing big feelings without needing that extra person there, because it is exhausting. Like I feel everything, and I feel everything incredibly deeply, and I ruminate on stuff for so long. Like I will talk to my partner, or I'll talk to you about an incident that I've mentioned in passing 2 months ago, and I've had instances of both of you going, "Are you still thinking about that?" And I'm like, yeah, I'm still thinking about that. So yeah, that's why when we discussed this, it was really important for both of us that we had these sessions on writing for mental health, on writing for the sake of writing, because it's just so important to us.
It is. Yeah. I think you just touched on so many different things there, and I think for you have gone through some very heavy things, and I think it's a blessing that you've been able to channel that into writing. How do you feel though then giving that to somebody else? So these are your deeply personal experiences. Would you, if you were to then publish that so it's out in the world, and somebody was to come back at you with criticism on that, how do you think you'd take that?
Yeah, that's really interesting, because I think that's one of the reasons why I'm not like super keen to identify my project and be like, this is what I am writing on, because I think like I'm going to say it out loud, what I want to do is a exploration of, like, it sounds really weird and kind of grim, but my physical body and like the relationships I was in during the times I was having surgery, and actually the relationship I had with myself.
Okay.
Have you read Emily Berry?
No.
I think you'd really enjoy her, and I've got her collection Dear Boy, which was the first time I kind of read quite visceral, graphic kind of body poetry. And to be fair, now I go back to it, it's not that much, but going from like quite pretty like processing poetry, it's quite like I would say it's kind of squelchy, and it's like visceral and like tactile. It's a wonderful collection.
Okay.
But she's a massive influence on what I want to do with that. So there's that element of that collection, which is what I want to do, and the big Emily Berry influence. But I think when you're asking about how will I feel about feedback and criticism, I think I've done a really good job of attending lots of performance poetry events and like slams and open mics, and I've kind of gotten used to like speaking. I'm not like speaking the truth, because that's speaking my truth, but like I've kind of gotten used to kind of giving bits of it away. There's a poem I wrote called Bitter, which I've only performed I think 3 times. I wrote it as an entry for the 2022 Huddersfield Literature Festival Poetry Slam, and I recorded it and sent it to as my submission, and I got selected, and I haven't performed it. And then I read it again last January, because last January's ink spill was the first time we were ahead of steam. And it landed on the same day of my last surgery. It literally been 1 full year since my last surgery, number 6. And then I read it again a few weeks ago at the Mind Over Slammer Poetry Heat. It's called Bitter, and it's very angry. It makes sense, but you kind of have to listen to the whole thing to enjoy it, and it's about like body and stuff. And people respond really well to it, but I respond really badly to it because it's really personal. So I guess it's a really rambling answer, but what I'm trying to say is like, poetry is all sacrificial, and the pieces I choose to share, I am accepting of the fact they're going into the world and they will be transformed through other people's experiences. And the poem and the words that I give and the experience I give are not what other people will receive. And I think I'm okay with that. I think if people came back and were like, actually, I'm an orthopaedic surgeon and I don't think your poems actually encapsulate the periacetabular osteotomy experience, because that's the big surgeries I had, I would have more issue, because I'm like, of course I don't know that, but I know how it feels to lie on a table and go under and be terrified and have people moving around you and know that people are gonna, like, it's a really intimate thing having surgery, because people touch you in a way that you will never have in your own body. I'm gonna stop there. But yes, basically, when I only choose to share stuff that I know I'm kind of giving away. If that makes sense. I know that was a very long answer.
No, it absolutely does. So kind of what I'm hearing there is you don't mind because it's so personal, you know, that really people can take what they want from it.
But people will.
Yeah, absolutely. But you know that you're putting your authentic self out there. So really, how can anyone argue with that?
Yeah.
It's your personal experience at the end of the day.
Yeah, and one of the joys of poetry and what we do is always the feedback people give us. And actually, it's really interesting that people loved the performance of Bitter I gave a few weeks ago. Whereas for me, I come off the stage and it's one of the few poems I feel physically and I actually have to go and like take myself away with, and it's why I perform it so rarely, which sounds like a really sort of like poncy thing to say, like, oh, I only perform it occasionally, but it is
because I think it's a painful thing to drag up to kind of reconnect with, isn't it? And I think you need to feel very comfortable in the space you're performing it in as well, and you do perform in such a variety of different places.
Yes.
I think quite often you need to feel safe to perform it too. And I think sometimes I know I've gone to some events and I've not felt particularly, for no reason, no fault of anyone's, but I've not felt that connection, so I've not wanted to be vulnerable there. So I'll probably choose a different type of poetry, and maybe I'll go more political to kind of get, rather than personal. If that makes sense.
And use that as a shield rather than like being vulnerable.
Exactly. And I think it sometimes changes based on where you are, I guess. I'm not sure. But yeah, I think you talked a little bit there about what Rosa said in our last episode, in that you put your work out there, but some people connect with it in ways that you'd never even imagine, don't they?
100%.
And they interpret meaning in ways that you never even considered.
Yeah.
So I think that's
I think one of my favourite lines is when Rosa said that her partner points stuff out and she's like, yeah, that's great, isn't it? And she goes and writes it down.
Didn't actually mean to do
We've
that.
all been there. Like someone was reading my novel the other day and they're like, wow, this symbolism's really good. And I was like, thank you. And I was like, highlighting it. I was like,
I've used symbolism intentionally.
Yeah,
it's
absolutely.
Funny,
but yeah, how about, let's like flip the script and be like, how about for you? Because we are very different people. I repeatedly say, and I say as the feeler, we get on really well because we are very opposite in lots of aspects, except for this like massive love for poetry. How do you use it for yourself? Because you're very private, if you know what I'm saying.
Yeah, I just don't. I don't like, I think I've said this before on the podcast, I don't really like putting myself into my poems too personally. So I've got lots of things I could talk about, but I just don't want to. If that makes sense. I just don't. So I use my poetry more to process the world around me, because I think one of the biggest things that impacts me mentally is the shit show of a world that we're living in. And I find it really bizarre that I seem to be able to see things so clearly and everyone else seems so deluded. And really, I know that sounds really pretentious, but I just have conversations with people that are so mind-numbing because the ignorance makes me feel so upset that someone could think and feel that way. That I can't handle that. I can't handle someone being so unfeeling, so inhumane. So I channel that into my poetry, my frustration with the world around me, with the helplessness I feel about some of the things I have to witness. And I have to just say, well, that's just how it is. Because I just always think, well, why is it like that?
I always think something really interesting about your poetry that I really, really enjoy. And we talked about how a lot of your imagery, for me, is cracked concrete with stuff going through. And it's that reclamation of like space, which I love. All of it is from your perspective, or from a perspective that you've created. And you are there, but you're like, we're seeing through your eyes rather than we're looking at you, if that makes sense. Like, it's a really interesting like body placement of the narrator or the poet or however you want to like see yourself, that it will only ever catch you from like the corners of our eyes. Like you allude to yourself rather than like leading with it.
That's quite interesting, and I think I'm glad, because I don't want everyone to only be able to see it from, well, I do want people to see it from my perspective, but I don't want it to be too I want it to be a universal experience when someone reads one of my poems. I want them to feel in some way targeted, if that makes sense, because I do want to bring about change through my poetry.
Yeah.
So I do write a lot about politics. At the moment, I'm writing a lot about war and the ignorance of war and the ignorance of attitudes towards refugees and asylum seekers, and I find it really heartbreaking, some of the attitudes that the children I teach have, and I know that that's not come from an 11-year-old's mind, that's come from a parent's mind, and I find that really hard to swallow. So in terms of mental health, it is my mental health, but it's my mental health that has been impacted because of the world around me that is changing so rapidly. And the future, just to me at the moment, and I'm sorry to end the season on such a bleak note, but it does seem bleak. As a young person in the world today, I do not know what the future holds, and I find that quite terrifying.
Yep.
And so I use poetry as a way of documenting that and trying to make sense of things that are nonsensical.
That's the line, yeah. I think you jigsaw understanding and you use poetry as your jigsaw pieces to like create a fuller picture of like how you feel and how you can share that without making it personal. Whereas I think everything I do is intrinsically personal, even though I also write political poetry, that's off my spoken word stuff. You are you do it so delicately. It's really impressive, and the fact that you carve out opinions but while giving people, like, you give people things to think about, if you know what I mean. Like, you get people to pause, and you're like offering on a plate and like, consider this, and then you leave it with them. It's really beautiful and really delicately done.
That's really nice to hear, because that's exactly what I want to do. So I mean,
you're doing it.
To know that that's going across, that's really good. I think when I first started writing poetry, years and years ago, I was very, very personal, actually. So like the very first poem I wrote was about something I was going through during lockdown, and it was I think just out of a lack of control, and poetry did get me out of quite a deep hole. Actually, I got myself into a bit of a pickle during lockdown, mentally, because I'm the kind of person who's always on the go. So for everything to come to a standstill, I found that very, very hard to deal with. And I went through quite a lot, and poetry helped me, but I didn't want anyone to see it. It was my poetry for me to process those very, very dark times, and nobody will ever read them, and that's fine. I think, we don't have to put everything out into the world, do we?
Nope.
Sometimes it can just be for us. And you know what? I probably will, and this sounds weird, burn that poetry one day. Good. When I feel as though I've worked through those emotions enough, because I've got it out there. It's in a physical form, and now it's time to let it go when I'm ready.
I love that little Viking funeral for a very dark time.
Definitely. But I mean, I really did like what Alice was talking about today, because Alice was coming at this from an artist's perspective as well, and I think quite often we do put ourselves into these boxes and label them, don't we? But I actually really love I find going to exhibitions very inspiring. Yeah. I go to a lot of art galleries because I like to get lost in art, and I like to then try and put what I'm seeing into words. So I like going to a lot of people who photograph society and photograph life, and that inspires me a lot.
You were at the Anthony Goulding's installation a few weeks ago, weren't you?
Yeah, I was, and that was amazing. I went to another place, and that was a critique of, it was to capture the male suicide rate, wasn't it? And it is the most moving piece of art I've ever seen. It was incredible, and it was created in 2005, so it's been there a good, oh my goodness, nearly 20 years, which is a lot. And it is just stunning, and and I think quite often art can help, can't it?
Also, like, physical structure, like, we're very lucky that we're in Henry Moore, Barbara Hepworth territory around here, and lots of their sculptures are around, and I find them very, like, affecting, which is so exciting.
Well, we're in a deeply historical place up in Huddersfield. History surrounds us, and I think that creeps into my poetry a lot. And I think sometimes it gets quite political with my poetry, because I think about how it was once the powerhouse of the country, the North, wasn't it? And now it's kind of been left and abandoned, and I find it very problematic. So I use my poetry to channel my frustration towards that as well. So we are doing the same thing. We do express issues relating to mental health, but in very different ways.
Very different ways, because we're different writers, and that's why it's exciting to chat to you.
Yeah, it is. It's nice that we come to this with different perspectives and different angles.
It is. But we should probably round off the episode, and with that, the season, which is
definitely
amazing.
Insane, isn't it, to think that we're at this point already?
Yeah, it's wild.
Yeah, so I was kind of thinking about that visuality, obviously coming at this from a bit of an artistic perspective. The cut and stick element, kind of being busy with your hands, I quite like that, and we do that a lot at Inkspill.
I was going to say, if anyone's gone to Inkspill, Hannah will be there wielding some glue sticks.
I love it. I think there is something to be said about being crafty and being hands-on. That physicality, I think, really helps the writing process.
Definitely. And also gets us off our phones, gets our screens away from us.
Yeah. So if you are still at a point at this point of the series where you're thinking, I still haven't got off the ground with a project yet, it might be an idea, like Alice suggested, to grab a newspaper, grab a magazine, and try to cut out lines, words, and organise them on a page. Yeah, pictures. Yeah. And collage a poem together or a piece of writing together.
And you don't even have to say them down. You could always cut them out and almost like collage, and then you can shimmy the paper off. Like take a picture with your phone, rearrange, and see kind of what, like, you can take like the same ideas, snippets, and like how you can re-glue them together. That could be really interesting.
Yeah, definitely. Absolutely, I think so. There are many ways that you can go with that.
Yeah, I love that, and I think something we really want to stress is the fact that the project we're encouraging you to create alongside this podcast, it doesn't have to be heading anywhere. It doesn't have to be necessarily like for something. If you want to use it for any mental health challenges that you're experiencing, please do, and don't feel like you're like if I start something I have to kind of keep it. The whole point of this project and this work is often that work evolves. So the project you started with us back in the intro episode will be entirely different by the end, and that applies to us as well. Another thing I took from Alice that I really liked is the idea of attending an event or a workshop or an open mic, something, whether in person or online. I think that'd be a really useful thing. That's something that we both love to do. We are in an absolute surplus of events in the sort of like Yorkshire, like northeast, northwest.
Yeah.
In the north, we have an absolute bevy of them. We have loads. So I think what we can do is we might sort of put together a sort of base list that people can add to on our social media. But there are loads around. We recommend using Eventbrite or Facebook. That's really useful to find stuff. And we'll try and like reshare stuff to our stories. So please, if you don't follow us already, check out our social media. We'll try and tag them everywhere. But we are Inkspill Poetry on basically everything.
Yeah. But we really can't emphasise enough, just going to one of these creative events. It's far less daunting than you expect them to be. So just please do put yourself out there, just at least once, and see where it takes you.
Yeah, I was going to say, we're all just massive nerds. Like, we're only there because we love poetry or we love writing, or if you go to a workshop and it's like novels, it's just, you're always going to be surrounded by people who love what you love. So it's going to be, it's like a nice set, like, scenario anyway.
Yeah, definitely. And then the final thing, I mean, it's just a small task, but finish your project. No, I'm joking. But finish your first draft at least, because we are finishing up the first season, which is obviously all about the getting started process, the initial process of kind of getting into writing and whatever your project is going to be. The next season, which we will give you the date shortly, that's going to be taking place in May, and it's going to be about editing. So we can't really talk to you about editing if you haven't got something to edit. So even if it is just the start of a project, even if it's just a few poems, if you're doing a collection or the first chapter of your novel, basically it would be useful if approaching the next season you've got something that is editable.
Exactly. Like, there's no I'm not going to crack out 50 poems by May.
No,
like, I'm just not. Like, you're not going to, well, no, you're hopefully going to finish your first draft.
Yeah.
But in the sense of, like, that's because you have that momentum, you've already started a lot further, whereas I have no poems written. So whatever level you are at when you want to come back to us in May with the editing season, please bring that. Like, don't be afraid. And also, at the end of the day, if you have no time to finish a first draft, life happens, please still join us. You know, there's still gonna be elements that you can kind of like incorporate within your own writing as you're going along. Like, it's not going to stop you from doing it. It will just kind of help you to kind of keep the momentum going forward.
Yeah, and I think as well, the editing process is it's something we really want to highlight, and the importance of.
So it really wants to.
Yes, I really do. So I think it will actually be really helpful to have these ideas in mind when you are still doing your initial writing too.
Yeah, exactly.
It's kind of what's to come next, I guess. But other than that, just 3 very minor little things to get on with. But that it's the end of season 1.
Yeah, end of the winter season.
So season 2 will be dropping. Do you want to give us the date. Abby.
Yeah, I believe it is May 17th. It'll be the third Friday in May to line up with one of our Ink Spill nights. And we will be back with more wonderful guests and more of our wonderful selves. If you haven't already, like I said, please follow us on socials, because we'll be keeping you updated on workshop activities and guests and any links you might want for like Dwell Time or our other writers. We also have a mailing list, which is in our link tree, again on our social media, and we will soon be having a website where people can search us.
Yes.
But that's a job for another day.
It is.
And with that, I think it's time to sign off.
I think so. At the end of season 1, we've done it. A huge thank you for sticking with us whilst we figure out this, because as we said, this is a completely new venture for us, and we have just been trying to figure this out for the first season. So thank you for sticking with us. Thank you for your feedback and your comments. We hope you've enjoyed it as much as we have, and we can't wait to be back for season 2.
Yeah, huge thank you to all of our guests. They have been absolute dreams.
They have.
And it was just such a privilege to talk to them and have that time with them. We really appreciate it.
Yeah.
We will see you guys in May. Thank you very
See you in May.
much.
Bye.
Bye.